Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are at our module 6, discussing the quality of managing challenges of the shared life. We have one more module after this, in which we will inshallah conclude after discussing some how to develop love and companionship and compassion towards one another. Some of the takeaways from today's module I will re-emphasize because I think it's really important that we recognize, I mentioned in my first talk 2 weeks ago, that everyone has a different personality, different upbringing. Everyone comes in with a different baggage, different history, different past, different expectations, different strengths, different weaknesses. And a good marriage takes both of those and is able to work with that and is able to manage the challenges that come as a result of it. So you might come across a challenge where, for example, your wife's strength might be more relevant and might be necessary. You might come across a challenge where your husband or your wife might feel like this is not an area that I really feel strongly about managing, and perhaps the other person can step in. So it's important to be aware of what you're bringing in, important to be aware of what the other person is bringing in, and how to manage some of these challenges. So again, when you get married, it's really important to keep in mind that the problems are no longer his problems or her problems, they're our problems. The issues are no longer related to the way he does things or the way she does things, even though the main contributor could be the husband or could be the wife. But now it's part of a system. That system is what needs to be looked at and what needs to be worked on. When we do family therapy or even couples counseling, we don't look at each individual without looking at the system. We may look at how each individual contributes to it, but the intervention, the intention, and the focus is still the system. Keep in mind, though, challenges are part of our lives, no matter where you live, no matter who you are. And happy couples don't avoid challenges. The goal is not to be avoidant. In fact, it's better if you face a challenge, you develop yourself, you build resilience from it. It prepares you for future challenges. Develop a system when you face a challenge and how to manage future challenges, right? So if, for example, you have an issue of, for example, let's say a child needs, like for example, one of my children is very active, physically active, and he needs to, just because that's his personality. My older one is not like that. He's like me. He can stay inside all day long and he'll be happy. My younger one needs to be out, right? So, we have to have a system in which we cater to that. Initially, it was a challenge because both myself and my wife were not really extroverted individuals. We kind of prefer to be more, homebound. But alhamdulillah, we were blessed with a child who is the opposite of that. He likes to be out more. So part of the challenge was, how do we navigate that? Who's going to spend time with him when he's outside? Who's going to keep an eye on him? Who's going to figure out who his friends are, who the families are? So that challenge is meant to prepare us and to allow us to develop a system within this big system. Not to mention, it also allows us to communicate with one another. Because whenever you have a challenge, your emotions are going to be up. You are going to have disagreements. And we have to learn to navigate them. Some of the challenges we'll talk about today, I'm sure every single married individual in this room has gone through. Okay, so if you feel comfortable, you can raise your hand. But which of these areas, they're on the next slide, I believe. Right, there we go. Which of these areas, these 6 domains that are on here, have posed a challenge to you in your relationship, in your marriage? In-laws. If you don't raise your hand, I'll be very surprised. Unless you're just shy about it, it's fine. One of the most common problems, it's a universal issue. Some cultures might be more prevalent than others, but it's one of those issues that I've seen it pretty much every single type of couple that I've worked with. It doesn't matter how independent you are, it doesn't matter how financially strong you are. In-laws almost always pose a challenge. Attitude towards intimacy. We talked about it last time. Last module, Dr. Human went over it. But this does become a challenge within couples as well. Finances. How many people would say finances has somehow brought in some stress? And again, it's not about how much money. That's usually not the issue. I'm currently working with a couple. Both of them collectively make probably, I would say, around $700,000 a year, which is a lot of money in the US, okay? Almost close to a million, three-quarters of a million, you can say. But they're having financial problems. You know, the first time I heard about it, I was like surprised. Like, really? You're having money problems? you know, some of us don't even make that much in the US, and we're struggling. So it's not the amount. It's how the finances are managed, and we'll talk about it. Spending recreation time, leisure time, entertainment. And we also put in there like quality time with one another. That tends to be a problem as well. Roles and responsibilities. Whose job is it to do what? Who's supposed to manage what? That becomes an issue, right? Some of those things might be kind of clear from a cultural perspective. Some of those things, for example, it might, in certain cultures, almost, I would say most of the Muslim cultures, cooking and cleaning and house management is a primary role of the wife. That's thing, and making money and making sure everyone has, their needs are being met is the responsibility of the husband. And we'll talk about even there should be nuances, but still there seems to be issues when it comes to managing those roles and responsibilities. And if you have children, child rearing becomes a huge issue from the day these kids are born. Mashallah, they are a big responsibility. And that's why you're rewarded for it, right? Parenting is a form of ibadah, right? That you're fulfilling the responsibility that Allah has given to you. Not because they're going to grow up and they're going to take care of you, or they're going to make money for you, or they're going to, become that trophy child that you want to be, because children are gifts from Allah. They're an amana from Allah, and it's our duty and our job to fulfill that in a responsible manner. So let's talk about in-laws, okay? We talked about this before, two different people. We're talking about just first two people, right? You have a husband and you have a wife that are coming in and that are trying to start a relationship. Now you add an extra layer. You have the husband's parents, you have the wife's parents. You have the husband's sisters and brothers, but sisters tend to be the ones that cause some of the tension. And you have the wife's siblings. Okay, all of those different personalities are all coming into play and are all somehow creating some of the tensions that we see in our relationships. Okay, everyone has a different perception, different idea. Everyone wants to, and mind you, people come with good intentions. One of the most common dynamic that we see that tends to be a problem or seems to be the main culprit relationship, unfortunately, is the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, right? It's a very common one. One of my teachers in the madrasa used to say, like, maybe it was a wisdom of Allah that we didn't see the dynamic between the Prophet's mother and his wives, because it would be interesting, because it's a natural dynamic. It's very why is it natural from a psychological perspective? The way I understand it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us differently. We all believe in that. This is our aqidah. Men and women are different. We are different biologically, physiologically. We're different psychologically, emotionally. And we complement one another. Men need women for certain things. Women need men for certain things. One of the things that women end up, most women, not all, obviously there are exceptions to this rule. One of the areas that women depend on men are emotional strength and comfort. Okay, having a man, just sometimes some women will say it. When we work with individuals, for example, some women will come from very abusive families, very abusive marriages. They'll say, but at least I have a husband. I feel comfortable. I feel safe knowing that I have a husband. Even just the presence of it, mind you, it could be someone who's not a healthy one for that person. And so when in the life of a woman, and the women here can attest to probably, and if you disagree, please do let me know. There's a certain place that a husband has, a certain place that a son has, a certain place that a father has, right? Now, if you go Freudian, you can, he makes it completely sexual and goes extreme in the other opposite side. But the point is taken from there as well, which is that there's a certain comfort, there's a certain complementary feelings that you feel from those of the opposite gender. Okay, hence why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we among His signs is that we made you into pairs, because for what? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so you can have sukoon in this relationship. You find peace and comfort in it. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Right? You feel the mercy, you feel the love in this. And so what happens in a son who's growing up in a household, the mother has this natural affinity to that son. Okay, he's my boy. They say mama's boy. There's truth to that, right? And then there comes a time when his attentions goes towards other women, naturally. This is how we are. And then there's one woman that captures his attention so much that he wants to spend the rest of his life with that woman. Doesn't matter how pious of a woman you are, there's going to be jealousy. Okay, that's very natural. It doesn't make you a bad person. Okay, in fact, we know, for example, Aisha radiallahu anha, and we know even from amongst the female Sahaba, this type of jealousy has been reported. This is natural. This is how women are. There's nothing wrong with that. And so then that competition begins to emerge. Because for that woman who's marrying a husband, she's seeking comfort from him, from that mother who now feels threatened. Like, my God, this woman comes in here and I'm the one that gave birth to him. I brought him up here. I made him the eligible bachelor that he is. And now she comes in and takes his attention away. That's where this tension oftentimes comes from. Okay, it's not coming from a malicious place. And then sometimes, for example, if there's a child, and this is something that I've also noticed in many families, those that I work with and those that I know of, the mother-in-law will make a comment. Will say something like, he really needs to eat a bit more. He looks a little bit skinny, right? Now, what's the intention behind it? The intention is that my grandson, he could be a little bit healthier. I'm worried about his health, right? If you give husnul dhan, that's how you would assume. But how is it interpreted in the mind of the mother? She's criticizing the way I'm raising my son. She thinks I don't feed him enough. She thinks I'm not a good mother. Now, again, that's also not meant to be intentionally malicious. You see what I mean? There's a very normal human tendency to be able to interpret these things in a certain way, given the dynamic of that relationship. So this is something we need to be mindful of, both men and women. There's a research study in 2021 that showed both of them report more conflict with their mother-in-laws than their own mothers, both men and women, and especially more common for women. And this type of tension, in the survey that was done in the US, there's a report on Muslim healthy marriages. You can go look it up. It's with ISPU, Institute of Social Understanding and Policy, I think. And in this report, they identified through data some key factors that lead to divorce amongst Muslims in the US. And one of the major factors is in-laws. The tension that exists because of the in-laws. Okay? And so this is directly linked to a measurable increase in marital dissatisfaction and, unfortunately, divorce. There are other studies that were done, and this was done on actually non-Muslim couples, and it shows very similar pattern, which is that mother-in-laws felt that they are competing for their son's time and attention, which then creates more interference. Sometimes, again, not sometimes, oftentimes, this is subconscious. This is not intentional. This is not like mother-in-law. Which mother would want his son to be unhappy? Right? Imagine that. Like, people sometimes think, oh, my mother-in-law intentionally does it. She wants it. Right? Now, sometimes it gets to a point where you might hear some comments and whatnot. Again, if we're being honest, there's anger and frustration there. But it doesn't come with this intention that I want to come in and destroy this marriage. But those comments, those interferences, unfortunately, do create problems. And then prolonged in-law stress has been linked directly to depression, to anxiety, to chronic illness, especially in the daughter-in-law. So this is a very common thing that we see. Now, the husband's role here is very critical. This is very important. A lot of times, men describe this feeling as if they're in between a rock and a hard place, right? And it's very challenging. I've done, therapy, couples therapy, where, for example, actually there was one that was done recently, where the complaint that the wife had, that we were at his house and his mother made a comment, and that really frustrated me. So I asked her, I said, okay, tell me, what would you expect of him? What should he have done? If just imagine, this is a hypothetical. It happens again in the future. What is it that your husband could do that wouldn't make you feel frustrated? Well, he should have said, no, mom, this is how it is, and this is how this is going to be. And you cannot just come in and decide for us. So I said, okay, now just picture this, right? You're sitting in a room, you have the mother here, you have the rest of the family here. The mother-in-law makes some kind of a statement, and the husband just says, no, mom, this is not how it's going to be. You can't just enforce things on us. I asked her, I said, I want you to tell me, what will be the outcome of that? Let's imagine that happened. Do you think the mother-in-law will be like, oh, you know what? He's right. I need to be mindful. It's his family. I can't just step in. Or do you think she's going to be like, how dare you? Who are you in my house, telling me how I can talk to my son? Do you see the dynamic? Do you see how it comes across? So it's not that easy. It's not that simple. That doesn't justify that if a mother-in-law is being abusive, that the husband needs to just be quiet and not say anything. I'm not, those things also happen. What I'm trying to suggest is that this, expectation sometimes is very challenging. So what needs to happen? Ideally, what do I tell the couples? I said, look, the husband does need to address this. Maybe not in front of the people, maybe alone. He needs to communicate with his mother and say, look, I appreciate your concerns. Just like the comment about the child. I appreciate that you care about my son's health. It really obviously makes me happy. You're a caring grandmother. However, when you say things like that, it makes us as parents, not my wife, not the mother, us as parents just look like we're not doing our job. You see, so that level of communication needs to happen. Okay. The other thing I also teach the couples is if the wife feels really like she's being put down, that she also can be assertive. She also can speak. Not disrespect. There's a difference between disrespecting someone and being assertive, right? Now, in some cultures, the moment you say something, it's considered disrespect, right? Obviously, that's a little bit difficult, but even then, there are ways that you can communicate back and you can validate and say, I appreciate your concern. However, we talked about this before. Validate always first and then bring your perspective. So this is a very, very common issue. And the two of you, the husband and wife, will always need to sit down and talk about this. In fact, not when things are heated up. When things are calm, the discussion should be, whatever happened last week that we had an argument about, if that happens again, what should I do? What do you expect me to do? Is that realistic? Okay, if I say this, would this help? Would this hurt you? The wife can also, the husband can also suggest to the wife, maybe you should say something like this. And then she can ask, if I say this, would that not make things worse for you? Work together, because this is an issue that's affecting your system, right? And what makes it worse is that someone from outside, which obviously they're extended family members, are coming in and affecting the way your relationship is supposed to be run. Now, we know from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is that maintaining good ties, Silatul Rahim, this is part of our deen. This is something that's encouraged by the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? But that does not mean that if someone is aggressive, someone is abusive, someone who takes advantage of you, that you can allow them to do it because you're supposed to maintain relationships. This also does not mean that it's okay for you to disrespect someone, right? Just because you're trying to create boundaries. So having healthy boundaries is an important part of this between the spousal unit and the in-laws, okay? The in-laws should not come in and start to dictate what the husband and wife need to do in their marriage. They have no right to come in and start to dictate. I'm not saying advice. Advice from a good place is different. Dictate how the children should be, raised in the household. If they see something that's problematic, they should always give good advice. Elders have a lot of good wisdom. They're coming from a lot of experience. So definitely, and the role of the husband and wife is to listen to that. Okay, go back, give it some thought. Hey, they said this. Is it true? Maybe we need to be mindful of it. And if it's something that's found to be true, then you work on it. You say alhamdulillah, you say thank you to them, and you work on it. If not, you just accept it. You say, you know what, you're right. This is a very good point. We will definitely look into it. And that's it. You can just leave it at that. Just because you heard something, just because someone gave you an advice, If the advice is not valid, you don't have to follow it. Right? You don't have to worry about it. But having a healthy boundary is going to be a good thing. The other thing is keep the communication filtered. Your family doesn't need to know everything about your relationship. Okay, this is more applicable to the female side than the males. Although males do share, females, again, we're different people. Females like to express themselves, share. If you ever hear two women talking to one another, they can talk for a very long time. Women generally can maintain friendships better. That's why women do well emotionally with children as well. This is not a weakness. This is also a strength, by the way. It's just a quality that females have. But it can also happen with men. Never share the things that are happening within your family to your in-laws. Now, one question that comes up is, what about abuse? Right? What if I'm being abused by my husband, by my wife? Should I not go tell my mom? Should I not go tell my father? Right? It requires some level of wisdom. It's not an easy yes or no answer. Right? My answer usually is that, like, obviously, what type of abuse? Right? If someone's threatening your life, you need to find a safe place. I'm not going to deny that. But if you're finding that someone's putting you down, if you're finding that someone is not perhaps giving you your right, maybe the husband is not allowing you to spend any money and he's controlling all the finances, then the next question is, who will you talk to? Is that person going to come and help, or are they going to make things worse? I mean, we know our families, and we can identify that there are people that when you tell them something, they'll come in and they might make things worse. Right? So find a person. Nowadays, I usually recommend finding a therapist is probably better than going to your own family. Although that's not always true, but I think usually because the therapist can be a bit objective. But find a person who can come in and who can navigate the challenge without creating more problems. Okay? But besides those issues, those sensitive issues, in-laws don't need to know, not even in-laws, friends. Okay? They don't need to know, your siblings don't need to know all the details about what's happening. What's sad is people share sometimes the most intimate details about things that are like, about their sexual relationships and whatnot. I mean, those things should not be shared to begin with, but even things like some of the personal struggles that someone might have. Okay? Now, if you are the type of person who likes to share, again, most of us, alhamdulillah, probably can't afford it. This is where therapy comes in. But if you can't afford therapy, I would say maybe use a diary or a journal or something, write your thoughts out, find some way, talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Share with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that strengthens your relationship with Allah, rather than sharing it with someone who might make things worse for you. The other thing here is that marriage is meant to create new norms. It's not meant to pass down the same pattern that existed in your family. Some things will work, some things will not work. That's just how it is. Okay, times are different. There's a saying by, it's a tribute to Ali radiallahu anhu. I mean, Allah knows. It's a beautiful saying. He said that about children. He said, don't raise your children like your parents raised you. Right? Why? لِأَنَّهُمْ خُلِقُوا لِزَمَانٍ غَيْرِ زَمَانِكُمْ. Because they were created in a different time than you were created. Now, we're talking about in this day and age, it's that quote is even more relevant. Because imagine, I mean, I grew up when I was 10 years old. I did not have access to a swimming pool. My son was at the pool today, right? Did not have access to any technology. In the summertime, I had a stick and then my grandmother's rooftop, and that's all I had. So a stick and a rooftop was my summertime, and it was beautiful, right? But now things are much, much different. Kids require a lot more attention. During our time, we had cousins and uncles and aunts, those who helped raise us. Grandparents, you'd go, talk to them, spend time with them, listen to them, eat with them. Nowadays, we don't have that kind of a blessing, unfortunately. Most people don't. So we have to create new norms. We have to create new systems, new ways on how to deal with some of the challenges that exist. Okay. Parents, again, should have a supportive stance, but hands-off approach. So in-laws, this is something I mentioned. So if you, inshallah, all of you who have children will become in-laws one day. This is one of the things that happens. Most people will say, I will never be like, my mother-in-law. I'll never be like my father-in-law. But unfortunately, the pattern ends but keep repeating. And the last thing, like I said, is have realistic expectations. In-laws are not going to be perfect. You're not perfect. No one is perfect. Okay, so if things don't work out, that's part of how life works. But you try to find a way through it, and you try to maintain mutual respect, mutual care. That part should never be compromised. The rest of the things you can work with. there will always be things, people who've been married for a long time, if you go ask them, are there things you disagree on? They will give you a list of it. But they're still married. They've been married for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? So having a disagreement on something doesn't mean that you cannot have a healthy, respectful relationship, okay? And I've already mentioned this, but Islam asks us to maintain family ties when it's hard. But maintaining the ties is not the same as having no boundaries. So there is a difference between there. You can still honor your parents, you can still respect your parents. In fact, not you can, you should honor your parents, you should respect your parents. It's if the mom complains that my son doesn't call me, that's a legit complaint. The son needs to call the mother, visit her as often as possible, spend time with her. If the mom complains that the daughter-in-law is not calling me, that's not a legitimate concern. Now, in a healthy marriage, what happens is usually people sacrifice. Usually people say, I know that I don't have to talk to my father-in-law or my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law, but for the sake of my husband, for the sake of my wife, I will do it, right? That's more of this sacrificing attitude that we talked about before that makes a healthy marriage healthy. But at the very least, recognize whose responsibility it is and make sure that person is fulfilling it and it's not passed on to other individuals. Okay, so we have an exercise here. It's a case of Ahmed and Aisha. They just had a baby 2 weeks ago. Ahmed's mom wants Aisha to come over with the baby every other day so that she can coach Aisha on how to care for the baby. On an occasion when they went over, Ahmed's mom spent a good amount of time correcting Aisha's mothering. Okay, so how does Ahmed's mom's feeling make sense from her perspective? We talked about this, right? She's coming from a place of what? This is my grandson or granddaughter. I care about her, this person. I want him to be healthy. This couple, for them, it's their first baby. You see? So I'm coming in because I have a lot of experience. Our parents had a lot of experience. Like nowadays, people only have 1 or 2 kids. Like my mom had 7 kids. I think her mom had like 8 or 9. I mean, if you go back, it's like dozens sometimes, So the other day, I met someone who said their mother had like 18 children. MashaAllah. So there's a lot of experience. So they're coming in like, okay, you know what? I want to make sure that they know what to do with their first baby. Maybe there's some things that they don't know how to handle. When we had our first child, I remember, my mom said, give him milk, right? Like, he was a bit older. We went to the doctor. The doctor did some blood tests. The doctor said, don't give him milk. So the dilemma was the doctor saying, don't give him milk, but mom saying, give him milk. So what do? Right? So what I would do is I would just take the milk bottle to the room and I wouldn't give it to the baby. So mom was satisfied, but obviously the health was a concern. I could sit there and talk to my mom about, by the way, the doctor said this, and then this is the blood test and whatnot. It's not going to help her. My mom never went to school, so she's not going to understand it. But I didn't want her to feel like I wasn't taking her perspective into consideration. So how does Aisha's reaction make sense from her perspective? Frustration, right? She's criticizing me. She thinks, I don't know what to do. A new mother, I don't know if you know this, but they say about like 60 to 80% of the women after they have children, they have baby blues, right? So it's a very natural sadness because of the hormonal changes. It's a very natural state. It's not something that's like induced or something that comes, because of some reason. And then out of those 60 to 80%, I think upwards of like 20% develop postpartum depression. Okay, it's very common. People don't realize this. People attribute it to like, I just had a baby, maybe I'm just tired. And then some people start saying things like, why are you depressed? You have such a beautiful baby. You have something to be happy about. It's not something I can control, right? It's my body that's feeling a certain way. I can't control that. So it's very easy for that woman who just gave birth to be easily frustrated. Like her emotions are not the same as they were before the pregnancy or before the baby. So that's something that we have to be very mindful of as well. And then what should Ahmed do here? He needs to have a relationship with his mother and with his wife. He needs to be supportive towards his wife, help her recognize, validate her concerns, needs to also talk to the mom, validate her concerns as well. It's not easy, but that's where the work comes in. I'm just going to speak to the men for a second. One of the things, unfortunately, nowadays, we have the red pill movement and then we have the feminism on the other side. What does it mean to be a woman, women's rights? Well, what about men? What's an alpha male, right? An alpha male is not the one who can put his foot down and get his things done, whatever he wants right away. That's not manlyhood. Manlyhood is that you can fulfill responsibilities, you can do things far more than your wife can, right? A alpha male, in my opinion, is someone who goes to work, works, 8 to 10 hours, however long it is, comes home, takes care of his family, takes care of his own duties, okay, offers extra help, right? Sacrifices himself because he can. Allah has given us that ability. I think sometimes we underestimate it. The Western mindset about burnout and self-care, I'm telling you, a lot of it is induced. It does exist. I'm not denying that there's something, but a lot of it is just like we start thinking, you know what, maybe I am burnt out, you know? I mean, just naturally speaking, if you just kind of go into this mindset of like, I work so hard, 8 hours, I come home, what did my wife do all day? And then now I have to do this, I have to take my kid to the swimming pool. Man, like, I feel tired, I need some rest too. I haven't gone out with my friends for such a long time. That type of mentality that we're fed through social media is very unhealthy. Women also get a dose of similar type of mentality, right? Your husband doesn't, look at you when he comes home. Oh, maybe he's talking to some other woman, right? Like this type of things are very prevalent in social media. So be mindful that, so for men, a real man is someone who has the capacity. Allah has given us the capacity to do all of these things. Okay, so don't underestimate yourself. You have the, Allama Iqbal, in one of his lines, beautiful poetry. If you're Pakistani, you'd appreciate it. He says to a person, not just a man, he's saying to a believer, but I like to obviously as a man take it for myself. He says, खुदा का दस्त कुदरत तू जुबान तू है यकीन पैदा करे गाफिल के मगलूब गुमा तू है. Right? He says, you are the hand that brings Allah's qudra into creation. Right? It comes through you. Okay? You are the tongue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's commandments. And he says, bring some certainty inside of you because you have been boggled down by doubts. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm able to do this or that. Yes, you are. If that mindset kicks in, you can do it. And the other piece which we talked about last time, we do it for the sake of Allah. We don't do it because the wife is going to be happy and give us the Husband of the Year award. It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be happy with us, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do it as well. Okay, now finances. Okay, financial problem. Again, I mentioned this before. It's not because you don't make enough money. Most people, in fact, I think if they did the survey, what they'll find is that couples who have less income probably have less problems. More money, more problems, right? So it's not about the amount. It's usually about how the money is managed. Okay? So now, usually I think there's a slide on this too. There are 3 different models on how money is managed. But before we get to that, some data. Financial disagreements are, in one study, #1 predictor of divorce among all types of marital conflict. And it was considered stronger predictor than intimacy, stronger predictor than in-laws, or even chores. Women who argued often about money were nearly 3 times more likely to divorce than those who argued rarely about money. And it's not about just arguing, there's like legit reasoning behind it. It's not just, they're just arguing for the sake of arguing. In a fidelity study, 2024, couples, and 1 in 4 couples say that the money is their greatest relationship challenge. In a 2023 study in Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found top trigger for money fights isn't the amount, it's the perceived irresponsibility. Again, perceived irresponsibility. That accounted for 40% of the conflicts within a marriage. 42% of the divorces say credit card debt played a role in their split. And this is up from 29% in the previous years. Okay? Hidden debt. Sometimes finances are concealed is one of the most common financial trigger for separation, right? It's hidden. Okay? So secrets about money is a form of betrayal. You shouldn't have secrets between you and your spouse, right? Because think about this, if your wife or a husband finds out, let's say it's mostly the men are the ones that are making the money, your wife finds out that you secretly have an account where you keep money, there's a million thoughts that will go through her head, naturally, right? Like, why is he doing this? What's the need? Who is it for? Why don't I know about this, right? And the question that I usually ask the same husband is, why doesn't she know about it? Like, what's the wisdom behind not telling this person? Sometimes in very rare occasions, I'll give you one example where I have worked with a couple where the wife had extreme anxiety and OCD. It was like clinical level of anxiety. And the reason that he hid, not like a secret account, but he just told her, don't worry about the finances. You need money, you can use the card, you can spend it. If it's not a big purchase, you don't even need to ask me. But the anxiety that she had kept wanting to ask, how much money do we have? How much money do we have? And so when I referred her to individual therapy, she actually had to go see a psychiatrist to take some anxiety because her anxiety OCD was really high. That actually lowered this need to ask again and again. That's a rare case. In most cases, the person wants to know, right? They want to know, are we doing okay? Do we have debt? Do we have money? Maybe there's a purchase she wants to make. Maybe she wants to know, should I consider buying this or not? Our kids are growing up. Do we have money for their college saved or not? Just saying, yeah, don't worry about it isn't enough. Maybe once a quarter, just sit down and show it to her. Here, this is how it is. Okay. Now I mentioned there are 3 systems, so we'll get to those, or 2 systems generally. We'll get to those. I'll come back to the other slide here. The first model usually is the one where, which is what's seen in most Muslim couples, right? The idea of nafaqah, the husband is providing for the household expenses. Wife, if she's making any money, she's keeping that to herself. In the West, what we're seeing more is this shared model, right? Both husband and wife are working full time, and they're contributing equally to the household budget. Okay. Now, I'm assuming most people, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but how many people here have like the first system where the husband's perhaps making the money, taking care of the house? How many people have a shared system here? Okay, it's almost close to about 50-50, right? In both of these systems, again, what's important is transparency, okay? And transparency, not to it is micro level transparency, like what's that $5 purchase there and 10 real purchase there. Rather, what's our income, okay? And what's the outcome? Where does the money come in from? Where does the money go? Which, by the way, what's sad is most people don't have a budget. Most people don't even know what's happening. Nowadays, there are apps that can do it for you. So it's not even an excuse. You plug in your credit cards into the apps. They tell you how much money is coming in, how much money is leaving. You can see graphs and charts of where you're overspending, underspending. Are you underwater or not? But the idea is that it's a good habit to be able to just disclose it, right? When you get married, you're supposed to disclose your debts, if there are any. And after you're married, you just disclose it. This is how much money we make. This is what goes towards the rent. This is what goes towards children education. This is what I'm doing with my saving. If you're spending money on your own self, that's fine too. This is what I'm spending on my own self. Especially when it comes to shared income. If both husband and wife are working, I always recommend it's okay to have your own money. Pick some kind of a percentage. You can say, okay, you know what? 60% of our incomes will go towards running the house. The 40% is ours. We can do whatever we want. Sometimes husband or wife might even have elderly parents that need to be taken care of, right? That's a very legit thing that we need to be mindful of. You can't just leave them, right? So if the husband or wife feels that the extra money that I have without, taking away from the rights of the family, their own family, their spouse, and I mean rights and needs. I don't mean like extravagant things like, going for the 36th Umrah, right? Because we have a family tradition every year we go to Umrah. That to me is extravagance, by the way. So if instead of that you can give money to sadaqah or give it to your parents, then I would suggest you do that, right? But if the needs are not being taken care of and that money is given to the brother or given to the sister or the parents, then that's where the right issue comes in, and that shouldn't happen, right? And also keep in mind that spending money on your family is a form of sadaqah, okay? So when you engage in that practice, this is not something, what's the beauty of marriage is everything you do is sadaqah. And I'm not a scholar. If someone's a scholar here, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Intimacy is a sadaqah, right? The Sahaba asked, like, are you rewarded for intimate time? And the Prophet said, yes. If you get sinned for engaging in zina, then you get rewarded for spending that time with your wife, right? Spending time with your children, that time not only builds a relationship, but it's a time that you're sacrificing for the sake of your family. Giving money, as this hadith says, is a form of charity. So, understand that. And the other thing is, you're not going to feel fair, right? What I'm saying is, a lot of times men who are the sole breadwinners will say, it's not fair, right? I make all this money, I do all this work, and like, where does it go? Okay, that feeling isn't a healthy feeling, by the way. What I usually do with that is I ask them to describe it. Okay, what would you want? Like, how could this be fair? Just, do you have any idea, suggestion? What do you mean? What does fairness look like to you? Sometimes it's a very easy answer. It could be like, I had this one husband said to me that before I got married, I used to buy like a new video game every month and then play it, and it felt good. It felt really nice. But now I feel like I can't do that. I said, maybe you can. It's like what, $30, $40? Not a lot of money. Like if that's what makes you happy, then go for it. You don't need to like suppress your desires that are halal. You're not doing anything haram. And if it's not taking away from your family, that should be fine. So sometimes it's the matter of going in detail, because shaitan is what is putting thoughts in our mind. What does she do all day? She just sits home. I'm the one that's busting my butt and like dealing with this boss, this crazy boss of mine. And then she just goes and just buys whatever she wants. She wants to go have dinner at this place. So those type of thoughts are coming from shaitan, right? If you're spending money on your family, going out for dinner, extravagant place, if you can avoid it, do it. But if it's once in a while, that's also a form of sadaqah. Okay, now going back to this slide here, because this is also really important. So the things that you want to ask, right? Because this is kind of what shows up in couples. There's 6 questions in the workbook that go beyond like who pays for what, and they're meant to surface more emotional relationship with the money. We all have an emotional relationship with the money. Like for me, growing up, my parents did not have a lot of money, so I always felt like I wish we had more money. So with my children, I make sure whatever they want, I buy it. But I think that's also an extreme. My wife has to sometimes stop me that you shouldn't do that because it's not a good habit for them. What if they grow up and they don't make that much money? Then now they're going to feel frustrated, right? So that's what happens. Growing up, what role did money play in your home? That's a very important factor, because for some people, money was scarce. So they might actually have this fear that I need to save money. There are people who, maybe earlier in their life lived a good life, but later on, maybe the father got laid off and they had a severe financial struggles. So they have this fear, like, what if I get laid off? And based on that fear, they're constantly trying to save more money. Okay, what is your hope and your financial future? Like, what's your fear? What do you want the future to look like? Right? What are some things that are worrying you about the future? This is a conversation you have to have with your spouse. Like, some worries are real. For example, nowadays, especially, unfortunately, children's education, it's expensive. Marriages, weddings can be expensive, right? Those things, unfortunately, are real fears. Sometimes it's a perceived fear, like the one I just talked about. What if I lose my job? The issue with that fear is that in this day and age, you don't know how long you won't have a job for, and how much money would you consider as what they call rainy day funds, right? Some people have anxiety. I had this one client, he had anxiety about this. So it's like, okay, how much money do you think is good for rainy day funds? Well, some financial analysts say 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. Okay, so then he saved 3 to 6 months, but he's like, yeah, but what if I'm laid off for more than 6 months? That can happen, right? And then I said, well, what if you have a permanent disability? What if you get into a car accident? Now it can happen, and then you lose your leg. Now you can't work. Now you're laid off for life, right? That's the problem. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqr, right? Wa ya'murukum bil-fahsha. The shaitan brings these anxieties related to poverty. You're not going to have enough. Oh my God, who's going to take care of you? We are supposed to have what? Tawakkul, right? Tawakkul, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who provides. Our job is to do the best we can. Put in the effort. And Allah is the one that will provide. That doesn't mean you can't save money, but there has to be a limit to that saving. Some scholars say up to a year. I usually recommend 3 to 6 months is probably the best. Beyond that, I think we're pushing too much. And have faith that inshallah Allah will provide. But on the other hand, also the other extreme is what? That people who just spend all of their money. They don't save, they just kind of waste their money. Don't do that either, right? Have a fund for children's college, have something saved on the side. All those things are relevant. Spend money, give charity, because that doesn't decrease the wealth, as the Prophet ﷺ said. What do you appreciate about your spouse's relationship with money? Right? There's some benefit to some of these things that I talked about. What's an area of improvement for you or for your spouse? Like, what can you do better? What can he or she do better? And what's one step that you can take together that would feel good, that would make you feel more comfortable with your current financial status? Usually, the first step that I always recommend is sit down, put all the expenses, all the numbers on the table, and go through it. Okay, if you have a a paid, Claude version, put it in Claude. It'll help you. It'll make your life easier. Okay. Put all your bills, all the credit cards, all the bank statements. Put it in there. Run the analysis. If you can afford a financial, advisor, do a consultation, and just ask, like, how are we doing? Okay. Are there areas that we can do better? Are there areas that we're struggling that could have been avoided? Do we need more money? Are we okay with it? Sometimes, especially people with two incomes, this is another mistake that they make. They will think that, okay, if I'm making $150,000 a year, my wife is making 150, that's 300,000. So when we're buying a house, let's buy one that we both of us can afford because we're making that much money. But what if one of you loses money or loses your job? What if after you have a baby, the baby needs to be taken care of and the mother can't work anymore, right? All of these things can happen. So it's better to spend less. It's better to reach for less, and not take a step that you cannot, or take on responsibility that you cannot fulfill. Those type of debts are usually the issues that lead to divorces. It's usually a house that's, the income, the mortgage payment is too much, or a car that was unnecessary that, the resale value has gone down and you spent a ton of money on it. Now, there's 3 heartbreaking feelings around money that we talk about in the workbook, right? There's usually a sense of injustice. Like I mentioned this before, he spends on his family, but we're struggling, okay? Or I don't know where her money goes. She doesn't even talk about it. She buys all these things and then she expects me to pay for other things for her as well. Exploitation, right? She just kind of spends it all the time. The credit card debt keeps increasing, has no concern for it. Or a sense of insecurity, that I have no knowledge, I don't know what's going on, I don't know if I should feel secure or not, right? So again, always sit down, have this conversation, bring all the numbers in, and let me tell you the beauty of it. Financial stress and financial problem is probably the easiest one to deal with. In-laws is very hard to deal with, right? Because you're dealing with these personality. Finances is just numbers. It's just a matter of figuring out, what do we need to cut down? Which subscription do we need to stop, right? Where are we spending money? Should we stop ordering more from Snunu because we're spending too much money on it? Those things are easy to do. Once the number's in front of you, 1 plus 2, 1 plus 1 is equals 2. It's easy. So that thing that could be avoided easily, let's work on that. I want to be mindful of our time because we really have a very short amount of time, unfortunately. So Maghrib Adhan is in 6 minutes. And I know we're doing questions next week as well, so we'll hold off some of those questions there. Okay, the next topic is raising children. So we've talked about this already. But one thing that's really important, and this is where the problem usually comes in, is identifying what is the role of a mother versus a father. I'll share some statistics with you. In the Gottman study in 2011, they found out that 2/3 of the couples experience a significant drop in relationship satisfaction in the first 3 years after having a baby. I mentioned to you the honeymoon phase and how the relationship comes down. Usually it's the baby that brings it down, right? Not to say that the babies are bad and you shouldn't have babies, but that's just the way it is. Why? Because you have this another, person in your life. You have to take care of him or her. Your sleep is disturbed. Your intimacy is disturbed. Financially, it's expensive, unfortunately, nowadays to raise a child as well. Parenting disagreements are one of the most leading ongoing sources of marital conflict. And unlike most conflicts, they never fully resolve. This is a study done by PMC, or published in the PMC, which is PubMed Central. Children exposed to destructive marital relationships are at a higher risk for anxiety, conduct disorder, aggression. I talked about this last time as well, that when you have a disagreement, even if it's about the role of the parenting, don't have it in front of the children. And on the flip side, parents who model healthy conflict resolution raise children with better emotional regulation and stronger peer relationships. Okay, so parents, children are watching you. If there's a struggle, like kids' exams are coming up. We just had these assessments in schools, right? So assessments are coming up. How are mom and dad working together to help the child through the assessment phase? Right? Is one of them blaming the other? Hey, how come you don't do anything? I don't see you doing anything. Did you print that out? Did you make him sit down and work? Did you do this or that? Instead of blaming one another, okay, let's work on figuring out how we can manage this better. So they're watching us. So the first thing is role of a mother and father. You need to discuss amongst you, what is my role in this child's life? And that's not a permanent role, by the way. We're talking about in the moment. As we're going through this phase of our time. The child is at home. When it's a baby, we're talking about feeding, diaper changes, all of that. When he's a toddler, we're talking about playtime, right? When he's a little bit older, taking him to the park, reading him a book at night, right? Goes to school, now it's like, separation anxiety, how do you manage that? Who's dropping off, who's picking up from school? They get a bit older, their education, who's helping them with their homework, right? Those roles do change. So it's an ongoing conversation about what role should I be playing in this child's life, okay? And if you feel like you're doing something that the other person needs to be doing, bring it out, say it. I feel like you could be better at this. I'll do this instead if you could do this, for example, okay? And then the other thing I just talked about before is the extended family. What level of involvement do we need to have? Sometimes it's necessary. In the West now, especially because of the way economy is, sometimes parents-in-laws are a good source of, babysitting. And so it works out both ways. It works out for the couple because they can leave the kids with someone they trust. Works out for the grandparents because they can spend some time with their grandchildren, okay? But then when you open that door, you also have to be aware now there's going to be some intrusion that's going to come from the in-laws, right? Disciplining styles, parenting styles, okay? Are you too permissive? Are you too strict? Are you a type of person that's helicopter parenting? Are you too emotional with your children? Sometimes people get really easily angered with their children. Oftentimes in our brown couples and families, growing up at least, the role of a mother was what? Cooking, cleaning. The role of a father was just discipline, right? So most of especially most of the boys, didn't grow up having a good relationship with their fathers. Why? Because the only time we saw them was when we were in trouble, right? If the father was saying, "Hey, how's it going? Come here." If the father said, "Come here," you start shaking because you're like, something's up right now, right? That's not a healthy relationship to have, ideally. So what's the discipline? How is it being implemented towards the children? One thing that you don't want to do, which by the way, children are very manipulative, not intentionally. They don't do this on purpose, but they learn how to do things. They know if the dad's on the phone call, right? If the dad's working on a computer or doing his work things at home, and I ask him something, he'll probably say yes. If the mom's cooking or if she's talking to someone, her family, and I ask her for some screen time, she'll probably say yes. They know these things, right? So they try to take advantage of it. Or if the mom says no, they'll go to the dad. They'll be like, can I go do this? So what do you do if your son comes to you and says that? You say, hold on, let me ask your mom. Let me figure out what's happening here. Don't go ahead and be like, yeah, go ahead, of course, no problem, right? Because they take advantage of it. Again, not intentionally, but this just becomes part of learning for them. So if the other thing, this is really important, if you notice your husband or wife disciplining in a way that's not healthy, please do not correct them on the spot. Okay, do not jump in and be like, why did you ground him? Why did you take this away from him? No. Always have disagreements behind closed doors. Children should never know that our parents are disagreeing on how to raise me, because then they'll use that, again, unintentionally against you. So if you have a disagreement, behind closed doors, make those rules, come together as a team and implement it. Doesn't matter how much a child cries. No. If mom said you can't have, you can't watch TV after 9 p.m., doesn't matter how unfair I think it is. Doesn't matter if the World Cup matches are on. Doesn't matter if all your friends are watching. No. The answer is no. Right? It's not like, okay, let me go talk to mom. Because guess what? Now the child knows if I go and cry to Baba, Baba's going to go talk to Mama, and then Mama will have to change her decision. Right? If you feel it's unfair, still implement it. Then go talk to your spouse. Say, you know what? I do think that was a little bit unfair. Maybe 9 p.m. is not a good time. Maybe we'll do whatever the number is. The other thing I also want to emphasize here about disciplining, which is really important as parents, I mean, this is not a parenting seminar, but as parents, is always include the child in that process. Sit the child down, ask them a question. It's a weekday. You have to get up for school in the morning, right? You have to get up at 6 a.m. every day. And the World Cup is on. You want to watch the games. The games can run up to 12, 1 a.m. in the morning. What do you think we should do? What would you do? If you were the parent, right, what would you do? Do you think it's okay for us to allow you to sit and watch TV till 1 a.m.? They will tell you no. Children, like obviously if you give them responsibility, they will act responsibly. They will say, no, of course not. So then what's a good time? Maybe 8 p.m. is not a good time. Okay, how about 9, 9:30? 10 would be the maximum, but you promise me when that TV turns off, you're going to be in bed in 5 minutes. Something like that works better than trying to force your rules onto them and they just have no choice but to expect. And the last thing is house chores. Well, I skipped some of those things in the back, sorry. Okay, religious and spiritual development, it's similar to what we talked about earlier. Their development, decisions that you make, what they need to do. If you have a disagreement, it's the same rules. Don't disagree in front of them. Have that discussion amongst yourself. Childcare is not ideal nowadays. I understand if both people have to work, because we live in this really bad society where your worth is related to how much money you make, and unfortunately, all of us are forced to make a certain amount of money in order to just live a decent lifestyle. So these things do happen. If it could be avoided, avoid it. But if it couldn't be avoided, this is something you have to be mindful of. The other thing is that who takes care of what? If the father's working during the day and he comes home in the evening, maybe mom needs some time off. So she can ask, hey, can you look after the kids? I need to take some rest. Or I would like to go do some things for myself if you can look after them. There's nothing wrong with asking that, and there's nothing wrong with doing that as well. Right? So have that responsibilities divided up amongst yourself and make sure that you're having this ongoing conversation, because these things do change with each age. Each step, each year is going to be a different story. Okay. Now, housework and chores. So, a lot of times, especially in couples nowadays, right? Maybe some of you have maids, so it's not a big issue. But some of us don't have maids. So how do you distribute house chores? Who's going to do what? In fact, even if you do have a maid, my suggestion is when it comes to taking care of your children, when it comes to taking care of their needs, feeding them, spending time eating with them, playing with them, try to do that yourself, because those are the times that your relationship develops. Don't rely on the maid for those times, right? The maid ideally should be for maybe cleaning up things, maybe cooking in the kitchen, to just kind of take that burden away from you. But let's assume you don't have a maid. So chores are going to be extremely important for us to sit and have a conversation about. Okay? Who's going to do what? Where do you need help? What is it that I can do for you in this regard? Let's say laundry, right? As a family gets bigger, laundry, unfortunately gets bigger as well. So how do we manage that? Who's going to do the cleanup? Who's going to do the vacuuming? What about the bathroom cleaning? Do we hire someone from outside? Do we have enough money? Do we try to manage this amongst our own selves? That's a conversation that needs to have between us. There's a lot of data on this too, by the way, right? So, for example, women still spend 50% more time on house chores and parenting tasks than men, right? That difference should not be significant. Obviously, there's some things, depending on how you divide up the roles, you might have a household where the woman that's her responsibility. But still, that doesn't mean that the other person is absolved from the duty of it, right? It's good to engage in household work. The Prophet ﷺ used to, when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked, what did he used to do in the house? She said, he used to keep himself busy, serving his family. And when it was time for prayer, he would go for it, right? So serving his family, he used to take care of his own needs and the needs of the family, even though he had at one point, 8 wives, right? He could have easily said, you do this, you do that, I don't need to do anything. But that's not the role model that he presented. And then usually dual earner people, like where couples, both of them are working, they report the most dissatisfaction when it comes to division of labor, when it comes to this idea of who's going to do what, right? Okay. There is an activity, I'm going to skip it because, again, for the sake of time, we're getting really close to Iqamah is at 8:19. We're supposed to finish in 6 minutes. And I just want to get to the last point for today, which is leisure time. Okay, so one thing I just want to say, one of the biggest threats to our relationships, whether it's our marriage, our children, is this phone. I'm just going to say it as bluntly as possibly can. Okay, if this phone didn't exist in our lives, we would have a lot of time. We would have a lot of quality time, a lot of fun time. And before the phone, it was the TV, right? So these technology things that we have, unfortunately, they mess up our lives. Last week, you went through intimacy. And I don't know if Dr. Human talked about this or not, But one of the more common modern day issue is that we live in a very highly sexualized society. If you have access to any of the scrolling apps, TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook Reels or whatever, or YouTube, you will see that one of the largest producers, or sorry, consumers of social media, both husband and wife, in different ways. So men are intentionally shown sexualized content, right? Women are intentionally shown a specific type of content, which has to do with marketing and buying and jewelry and fashion and all that. This is all intentional. They're designing apps to get you hooked up, and most people don't have time because of this. If you were, and I, including myself, we were to do a good assessment of our time. In fact, I would urge you to do this. Pick up your phone, go into the screen time thing. Your phone checks the screen time, right? Look at your screen time. Look at the average screen time that you spent on anything in the last week. You'll be surprised. I saw this one couple that I worked with where they complained about leisure time. I said in the session, I said, okay, just for the sake of argument, give me your phones, right? And I went through their screen time. One of them had 36 hours of Instagram in the past week. 36 hours, that's 1.5 days in the last week that's spent on Instagram. Imagine that. And there's research that shows that people who spend more time on Instagram also have more depression. Okay? And the sexualization of the media right now, you know who the owners of these websites, Pornhub and OnlyFans? Israelis. You know that, right? And a lot of these people, they don't condone, they don't like to use it, but this is used in a way to control and manipulate people. There was a story that I read a while back, which I forgot which book it was, but it talked about how in World War II, they dropped leaflets of pornographic images in their enemy areas because exposing the enemy to pornographic material lowered their stamina, lowered their will, their motivation to engage. This is what nafsani issues do to us, right? So I'm telling you this because the world is designed not to make healthy marriages, not to make healthy families, not to keep you together, enjoy your time together, build relationship. In fact, they're happy if you're separated. They're happy if the son is doing his own thing on the PS5, the husband's doing his own thing on his phone, and the wife is on Instagram or whatever. They're all doing kind of their own things, and that leads to more spending, more consumerism, more materialism. That's the way the system is set up, right? So if we did a honest analysis of our time, leisure time would not be an issue, right? Spending time would not be a problem. We have a lot of time. And the other piece of it is, the more time that we spend on these apps, the more we ruin what? Our sleep, right? So most people, if you look at Sleep Foundation and whatnot, there's no one right number, but some of them say even 5 to 6 hours is sufficient. 5, 6 hours, 6.5 hours is more than enough. If you get 7 or 8 hours, great. But there are people nowadays who get 8, 9, 10 hours of sleep and they're still tired. Right? There's reasons behind this. Our diet, our physical activity, screen time, blue light exposure, all this plays a role. So sit down, do analysis of your own self with your own family. How do we spend our time? How can we spend more leisure time together? A time that's more one-on-one, right? Let's try to play a board game together. Let's go out for a walk somewhere. Let's do something that involves the entire family. Sometimes couple will say, well, we sit down and we watch a movie or a drama. Ideally, that's not a good time. I mean, it's still better than not spending time together. Let me just say that. But when you're sitting down and watching a TV, your attention is on the TV. A good, healthy time together would be when your attention is towards one another. Okay? And there are games you can buy that are supposed to evoke conversations between couples, between family members. You can play those games, whatever it takes. If you have a child who's more physically active, you play physically with him. But figure out what that looks like based on what you're missing out. I would be very surprised if you did an analysis of your own time management and found out that you have no time to spend. That would be shocking for me. And for some people, if that's the answer, it also could be because you're probably taking on more things in your life than you need to, right? Sometimes, for example, some people they bring their work home. And if you really sit down and talk to them, it's actually not necessary. They could have done it at work, or if they didn't do it, if they didn't answer their coworker, their boss, they're not going to get fired. But they have this anxiety of, no, I need to take care of this because what if, right? So do a muhasaba for your time in ihtisab, and you'll find that it'll be easier. Identify what the problem areas are. Build out like what's a realistic goal, right? In terms of leisure time, work together, be creative, use AI, right? This is where one-time technology you shall allow it. Here are my interests, here are my husband's interests, my kids like this. What can we do to have more leisure, connected time with one another? And one thing I mentioned last time, I believe, which I'll repeat again if I didn't mention, is that don't focus too much on quality time, but quality moments, especially between the couple. Quality moments. It could be, having a tea in the morning. It could be like right before going to bed, or right after waking up in the morning. How's your day? Tell me, did you have a dream? What's your plan for the day? Could be right after coming home from work, right? Intimacy is not time specified either. Intimacy could be at night, could be in the morning. The Prophet ﷺ used to have intimacy in the morning as well. So there's no specified time for that either. But quality moments, things that you do together in the house. Let's put the dishes together. Let's cook together. Let's clean together. Let's go out for a 5-minute walk. These things build relationships. These things are necessary because when other tensions come in, they can be a protective factor. Inshallah, I'll end with that. I know we have to go for for Isha. And you might have questions. You can always email me questions, but if not, next week, inshallah, we'll save a sufficient time for questions. So, subhanakallahumma rabbana wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khair for your attention. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.